Hey guys, welcome back. So today's lesson is going to be relatively short. It's going to be on wind erosion and deposition. It's going to be a relatively short video, so make sure you watch it, take all the notes. Everything that's in this video will be on your quiz this week. You will have the same time frame, 9 to 3 o'clock, 10 minutes to take it in. Make sure you're studying and paying attention. You will be having a test on erosion and deposition probably next week. Weathering as well. I'll give you the exact date, but it will be middle of next week, I'm going to be guessing. All right, so make sure you're paying attention. Also, there's going to be a second video for today's assignment. It will be your project for this fourth quarter. You guys all know how important that is to your overall grade and things like that. Please make sure you pay attention to that. You'll each be receiving individualized emails giving you your specific topic that you and you alone are responsible for. It's an individualized project. All right, so without further ado, let's go. All right, so when we're talking about wind erosion, sometimes you'll see it referred to as aeolian or aeolian erosion. They mean the same thing. They're just different terms, more professional terms. So what are we actually talking about? Well, when we talk about wind erosion, we're talking about particles, sediments, getting moved by the driving force of wind. Now, these particles could either be suspended in the air or bounced along the ground. If you're looking at the picture in front of you, you can actually see the three ways in which wind is going to move sediment. The small, tiny particles you see in the upper part of the picture are suspended in the air. They hang in the air. They're held aloft by the air currents. The medium-sized particles are going to do what we call saltation. If you speak Spanish or you took Spanish, you should understand the word saltar means to jump, and that's effectively what happened. These particles literally jump. They like leapfrog, it looks like there. Okay, so they don't get blown and carried in the air for long periods of time, but they kind of make these jumps along the way. And then the bigger, heavier particles are going to creep along the ground as they get pushed. Now, the combination of all these different movements can create what we call a sandstorm, like you see in the picture in front of you. And these are basically large erosion events where a large amount of sediment is moved by the wind and driven across large portions of the landscape. All right, so wind erosion can cause this thing called pitting. Pitting basically means little holes, little digs. Think about when you've gotten stuck outside and the sand blows in your face and you get these tiny little like stinging bits of dirt that hit you in the face. Now imagine you're a rock and that happens over and over and over again. This pitting is what results from that. The rock gets these little tiny holes in it, like you can see in the picture in front of you. Now, as time goes on, the pitting can get bigger and bigger and bigger. Why? Well, because you get that differential weathering thing that we talked about, where parts of the rock, like you see in the picture in front of you, are more resistant or less resistant to other. So the pitting is going to tend to happen in places where the rock is less resistant. And when that happens, those little tiny holes that you started out with can turn into bigger holes and eventually enormous gaps missing in the rock, like in the pictures that you've seen scroll past you in the last couple of seconds. All right, so when we talk about wind erosion, there's two main types. There's what we call deflation and there's what we call abrasion. We've talked about abrasion a little bit, but we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail now. Now, what deflation basically is when you have a mixture of very light, loose sediment and packed together heavier sediment. Well, deflation, what it's basically going to do is it's going to lift the very light stuff and leave the very heavy stuff. That's what you see in the picture before you. This typically happens in deserts quite often, where the sand and the silt are going to get lifted away by the wind, but the heavier pebbles are going to be left behind. And so you end up with what we call the desert pavement, which is why when you look at the desert is littered with just rocks strewn about. Abrasion, on the other hand, is slightly different. In abrasion, what basically happens is the wind is going to sandblast particular rocks. And when the wind sandblasts those rocks, what ends up happening is you end up with one side that almost gets a polished appearance. A lot of that side gets eaten away, whereas the other side tends to stay. Obviously, differential weathering is going to play an important role in this as well. When we're talking about wind deposition, or what we call aeolian deposits, okay, there are a couple different types. The most common is what we call a sand sheet. And this is exactly what it sounds like. This is a large, flat, open area, very little elevation, very low gradient of just layer upon layer of sand. These wide open expanses that you think of when you see images of like the Sahara Desert or the Mojave or the Arabian Desert. That's what you think of when you think of a desert. What you're thinking of is a sand sheet, just a large, flat area of tons and tons and tons of just sand. Also very common in terms of wind depositions are what we call sand dunes, probably the one that you have most likely seen. And what a sand dune basically is a gigantic hill of sand, silt, or clay that has been deposited by the wind. It's been blown or suspended to that point, dropped off, and created a large mound or hill of sand. Now, just like we talked about with glaciers, you can usually tell something about the way the wind was blowing. The gentle side of the dune tends to be the side that the wind was coming from, and the steep side of the dune tells you where the wind was blowing to. So, just like we could tell with drumlins, with glaciers, you can tell the same thing with sand dunes. Now, sand dunes are not only found in deserts, but they also tend to be found in coastal environments, along beaches and things like that as well. The last depositional feature I want to talk about are what we call sand ripples. And sand ripples are unique in that sometimes they can actually be found mixed in with the other types of deposits that we've talked about. But what sand ripples basically are these wave-like extensions that you see all over sand dunes, or sand sheets. Now, the important thing about this is that they give you an indication as to the direction in which the wind was blowing. They are always going to be perpendicular to the direction of the wind flowing. So if the wind is flowing to the north, these guys are going to run east to west. That's incredibly important, especially when we find it fossilized, because it actually gives us a snapshot of the environment that we're looking at when these ripples were formed. All right, guys, so that does it for the video on wind, erosion, and deposition. Please make sure you're taking notes. Please make sure you're studying this stuff for your upcoming quizzes at the end of the school week. And please make sure that you watch the video after this. That's going to be on your project. Put a lot of time and effort into it, and it explains everything you guys need to know. All right, with that being said, have a good night, guys. See you later. Bye.